A young Wisconsin woman appears to be the victim of a horrifying attack.
She had knife wounds to her hands, to both of her legs.
The distinctive wound that stood out was the word boy carved into her arm.
Her showing up in the condition that she was in, we had some major concerns there.
The investigation uncovers a complex personal history.
I just remember being really scared.
What were you scared of?
Alex.
They had been dating since November to the middle of February when she broke it off with him.
But when a body is discovered in a remote area, it turns the entire case upside down.
There was a lot of blood around the vehicle. He'd been stabbed several times.
Once we found him, we realized he wasn't a suspect. He was our victim.
March 22nd, 2018. It's a crisp...
Not a lot of crimes.
This idyllic community is not accustomed to emergencies. So when a local dairy farmer calls 911 about a possible assault, it comes as a surprise.
County 911. I have a young lady that just came to my house. She's by herself. She walked to my house here, and somebody attacked her, and she needs a doctor.
This young woman showed up at his door wearing muddy socks, covered in blood, very anguished, very panicked.
Did she say who did this to her? No, she said she was attacked and assaulted, and she's from Eau Claire.
The sheriff's department sends a deputy to the address, along with medical assistants and a state trooper for backup.
The deputy that responded asked her what was going on, and she was very confused, said she couldn't really recall, everything was really fuzzy.
What's less than you remember? How about we do that?
I remember getting them off of me.
Getting them?
Yeah.
Okay, so are we talking like a man? Okay, more than one man? Can you tell me your name, ma'am?
My God.
Do you know if you have any family elsewhere? Anybody that we can call for you? You know Jason's phone number? No. Do you know Jason's last name?
That could be considered defensive wounds to both of her legs in the thigh region. The wounds were very superficial.
It's just strange, it's bizarre. But the distinctive wound that she had, and the one that stood out the most, was the word boy carved into her arm. At that point in time, Eau Claire County detectives responded to the hospital to interview this young lady.
It's happening, and you're scared, and you just need to keep walking and walking and running, and I don't know. I felt kind of like a scared animal. I don't know how to describe it.
We do see that trauma can impact memory. We tend to remember things that we do much more clearly and more often than we might remember things that other people are doing to us.
The deputy is like, give us a description of their car, give us a description of them. Where exactly did this occur? She wasn't able to do that. So we don't know what suspects to look for, and there's an extreme sense of urgency to find the suspect.
Monica Kay was born in Stanley, Wisconsin on October 6th.
Some challenges really from birth, in the sense that her mom was very, very young when she had her. She was 14 years old. And I think growing up with a mom that's that young, that would have a big impact on her.
Her mom went through a lot when she was a kid, and Monica felt a big responsibility to be an adult or to be a parent in the household. She was really, really close to her family, but she cited a lot of generational trauma.
Her mother later married a man named Joe Carlin, and at age 4, he adopted her.
She became Monica Kay Carlin.
In high school, Monica didn't quite fit into any social circle, but her outgoing personality helped her make friends easily.
She was 2 years younger than me, and we shared an art class together. She was always kind of a zany, weird individual, and I think that's why we connected, because we both had similar interests.
She was a great artist. Anything and everything she could find to make art, she would, and her car was no exception. They had all these, like, doodles and little things, and you could definitely tell it was her vehicle.
I think she expressed her admiration for the beauty of the world through her art.
Monica's creativity wasn't the only thing that made her stand out among her classmates.
When she was a teenager, around 15, 16, she started really experimenting with her gender fluidity.
For the whole time that we were together, Monica had a really masculine appearance and was dressing and presenting more outwardly as male. As time progressed, she started to dress a little bit more feminine, so she was wearing more tightly fitting clothing as well as doing her makeup more often.
Monica started identifying as masculine during high school, before eventually identifying as both feminine and gender fluid.
A big part of her was changing her style to make it how she wanted and not others wanted it. The whole idea of her doing her own thing, being her own person.
In 2015, when she turned 18, Monica legally changed her name to Ezra McCandless.
She played around with her name for a while. She thought Ezra was kind of a gender-neutral name, which really embodied her both masculine and feminine.
McCandless was inspired by Chris McCandless from Into the Wild. She really resonated with that character, kind of on his soul search, finding himself.
We all transitioned with her and knew her as Ezra. Like, Monica was dead. That was not who she was anymore, and we all accepted it. So from then on, it was Ezra, and that's how we knew her.
After high school, Ezra attended the University of Wisconsin in Marinette. She started hanging out in a coffee shop in Eau Claire, where she met someone new.
At 19 and still somewhat in search of herself, Ezra meets a 33-year-old Jason Mengel, who is a medic in the Army National Guard. They develop a relationship.
Jason was always a cheery guy, always had a smile on his face and wanted to make friends with everybody.
He had things going for him. He was kind. He was generous. She described this boyfriend as the love of her life, that they shared an ancient love that would never die.
It really felt like there was a spark there. To Ezra, it was just her and Jason, and nothing else could stand between them.
Ezra and Jason moved in together, and everything seemed to be going well, until Ezra found out she was pregnant.
I would imagine it would be very confusing for Ezra at a relatively young age. Jason didn't push her to do anything one way or the other. It was her decision.
At 20 years old, after agonizing over the decision, Ezra chose to get an abortion. Her relationship with Jason struggled to recover.
Shortly after, their relationship seemed to unravel, and he's sleeping on the couch.
She begins to seek comfort in a man named Alex Woodworth, and their friendship evolves into a romantic relationship. Jason learns about this through text messages that he discovers, and that causes Ezra and Jason to break up.
Obviously, there were some tensions because of everything that transpired, but they remained friends throughout this.
Now, just a month later, Ezra has become the apparent victim of an assault and struggles to remember details.
She's only asking to see one person over and over. I want to see Jason. I want to talk to Jason.
The deputy somehow obtained his phone number, contacted Jason Mengel, who pretty quickly responded. He doesn't know what happened to Ezra. He said that they were ex-girlfriend and boyfriend, that they used to live together. So At this point in time, there's just a whole lot of question marks. But he did respond to the hospital where Ezra was at.
When detectives speak to him, they try to gauge his involvement in the situation.
And we were able to quickly rule out Jason's involvement just based on his alibi and just speaking with him in general. We knew that he wasn't involved.
Their initial interview, he relates his relationship with Ezra and some of the trials and tribulations that they had. Even though they were now broken up, he still loved her and cared for her very much. Jason McCandless seemed to be a pretty good guy. I mean, he obviously loved Ezra McCandless.
Jason reveals that Ezra recently went through another breakup with the man she had cheated on Jason with, a mutual friend named Alex Woodworth.
About beginning of November, as Jason and Ezra were kind of on the rocks, she started to see Alex. We're trying to figure out what happened and where it happened and where Alex might be and if he's the one that did this to Ezra.
Coming up, Jason tells detectives about a strange encounter.
He was very concerned for her safety and for anybody's safety who was around her.
And a police report presents a key piece of evidence.
Officers see, ultimately, Jason ride off, and Ezra and Alex get in the car and drive off together, alone.
Ezra McCandless seems to be the victim of an apparent assault, but is struggling to remember details that could aid in the investigation. When detectives speak with her ex, Jason Mengel, they learn there is a more recent ex in her life named Alex Woodworth. Jason tells detectives Alex is the mutual friend Ezra cheated on him with.
Alex Woodworth is a barista at a coffee shop in Eau Claire.
Ezra, Alex, and Jason all hung out at this coffee shop on a routine basis.
The two of them had been intimately involved at some point while Jason Mengel and Ezra were in a dating relationship.
Jason says after he and Ezra broke up, a little over a month ago, she continued seeing Alex for a few weeks, until she broke that off, saying she was contemplating getting back together with Jason.
Ezra and Jason broke up here and there, but always got back together. They would call each other husband and wifey.
So at this point, she wanted Jason back. And despite all the problems he had with Ezra, Jason still valued her friendship.
Jason claims that hours before Ezra reported the attack, he was at the coffee shop when Ezra came in looking for Alex.
She was described as like barging in or storming in and just acting out of character. Something was off that day.
She told people that she was going to go over to Alexander Woodworth's residence, and that she wanted to return a water bottle and a bookmark.
When she left there, her demeanor was such that Jason Mengel was very concerned for her safety and for anybody's safety who was around Ezra at that time. She wasn't acting herself.
Jason tells police he decided to check on Ezra and Alex.
He was concerned for both of his friends, so he hurriedly rode his bike over there. When he gets to Alexander's house, he sees Ezra McCandless's vehicle, notices that it's idling in the driveway. He's like, oh no, what's going on here? He goes into the house and finds Ezra in Alex's bedroom, and they're having a discussion. He said it wasn't a heated discussion. It was just a back and forth discussion about things he wasn't quite sure of. He asked them both, "Are you okay? I'm concerned." "Yeah, we're okay. You can leave now. We're going to sort some things out, and then it's going to be all right."
Jason says when he left, he was surprised to find police officers waiting for him.
He was by a school, so a janitor actually called him in as a suspicious person, at which point law enforcement showed up and talked to him. He said that he was there to check on Ezra and Alex.
Officers talked to all three of them and determined nothing's wrong.
The officers didn't see any need to step in and intervene in any way at that point.
When detectives investigating Ezra's attack talked to the responding officers about the incident that occurred just 3 hours before the 911 call, they learned something concerning.
Officers see, ultimately, Jason ride off on his bicycle, and Ezra and Alex get in the car and drive off together, alone.
It's in her vehicle, a very distinctive Chevy Impala. Distinctive because she was an accomplished artist and she had drawn some caricatures on the top of the car and the hood.
It's the last time anyone sees Alex or Ezra until she shows up at the farmhouse, covered in mud and blood.
We needed to find Alex and get his side of the story.
Investigators question if Alex could have been the one who attacked her. So they go to talk to Ezra again.
How are you doing?
I'm tired.
Yeah, sounds like you've been through it. Yeah. Why don't you tell me about yesterday?
Because I know I'm Ezra, but for some reason I kept telling him about Monica Carlin, because that was my old name. I just remember being really scared and just being in pain.
What were you scared of?
Being hurt.
By who or what?
Alex.
Okay. By him doing what, though?
By him, like, harming me and making me want to do something he wanted.
So, at some point he carves Boy into your arm. Mm-hmm. And then, when did that take place?
It took place when we got in the car.
We knew Alex needed to be interviewed. We knew Alex was our suspect. Ezra's saying he's the one that tried to assault her. So in our minds, we need to find Alex.
We searched the apartment. He was not there. Checked the coffee shop. He was not there. We started checking Alex's bank records. None of that yielded any helpful information as far as where Alex might be. Our concern level was starting to build. We knew there was more work that needed to be done. This couldn't wait.
After speaking with Ezra McCandless, investigators are focused on locating the last person she was seen with, 24-year-old Alex Woodworth.
Our priority is finding Alex and finding out where he is. The fact that Jason Mengel was concerned for the safety of all the other parties involved, the fact that Ezra had presented the way that she did to the Dunn County deputies, and then Alex wasn't found at any of his regular haunts. So, yeah, we were concerned.
Alex's family and friends say they haven't seen him in the past 24 hours, but they can't imagine he had anything to do with Ezra's attack.
They said that he had been dating Ezra since November to the middle of February when she broke it off with him. He didn't have an issue. He respected her wishes.
My mom called me and told me that the police had called and said that Alex had been missing. She said that they had found Ezra and that she was incoherent, so she was really worried something bad had happened to him. Alex wouldn't just go missing. He would do everything he could to protect her if something had happened, and so I was more worried that he got hurt trying to protect Ezra.
24 hours into their investigation, police tried to retrace their steps.
So we just thought, let's start at the last place that she was seen, which was the farm.
As we get to the road, we're driving past a field entrance that is muddy. Lieutenant Piper said he would stop and check that field entrance.
I was just walking around, and I remember looking down at one point and seeing a couple of footprints in the mud.
Okay, you can see her footprints there, and right there. She's going that way.
We could see in the mud one single set of footprints coming over a knob, leading away from the woods to the main road. We could also see a set of tire tracks driving in, but not out.
We walked up the farm access road. There was a little bit of a rise, and once we got up to that rise, you could see the Ezra's vehicle.
As we start getting closer, we could see Ezra's car in the mud and stuck. We could see things thrown around outside. It looked like clothing, shoes, blankets.
It looked like some sort of a struggle based on all of the things that were laying out in the grass. Saw a large amount of blood.
There's blood there. There's blood along the side of this.
On closer inspection, investigators confirm they're dealing with more than an assault.
And then we could see what looked like a human body hanging out the back driver's side door. Once we got up to the car, we saw that it was Alex.
I've been in law enforcement for a long time. I've seen a lot of horrific things, but I wasn't prepared for what I saw at this particular scene. There was a lot of blood around the vehicle, some inside the vehicle. I observed that he'd been stabbed several times, to include his neck being slashed behind his left ear and other places on his body. All kinds of scenarios pop up in your head. Was she and Alex the victims of some random strangers? Was she the person who attacked Alex? Was she acting in self-defense, or was this some pre-planned thing?
Just one day after the 911 call, the case has taken a major turn. And officials need to determine why Alex Woodworth was killed.
As the case started, he was our suspect. He was the only person that we thought did this to Ezra. But once we found him, the big question at hand was why it happened. Did Ezra kill Alex?
After finding Alex Woodworth stabbed to death in the back of Ezra McCandless's car, police inform his family about his death and seek to learn more about him.
Alex was born in St. Croix Falls, Wisconsin, but we both grew up in Osceola, Wisconsin, in the same house that my parents still live at. And he was a pretty typical older brother. He was very loving in his own way. He had a lot of friends. You could tell that he always wanted to be there for them. He was a big, big heart.
Loved ones say Alex's empathy is what led him to pursue a career in education.
Alex went to college in Eau Claire. He eventually settled on a philosophy degree, and he was planning on going to graduate school to become a philosophy professor afterwards. He was so deeply caring about people, and I feel like he had such a hard time seeing red flags or the bad in people.
Needing more information, investigators revisit the last person who was seen with Alex.
The next morning, I went with an investigator from Dunn County, and we went and re-interviewed Ezra.
Okay, what do you think we found at the end of the road, Ezra?
Was it my car or anything?
We did find your car. What happened back there, Ezra?
I think she had a moment where she realized that what she initially told the detectives wasn't matching up with what they found.
And I think something happened to Alex, and you know that too, right?
Yeah.
What happened to Alex?
I got him off of me.
What led you guys out there in the first place?
Just to find somewhere to talk. That's all I wanted. I just wanted to talk.
She told us that Alex started driving the car down the field entrance road, up over the hill, and it got stuck.
So I was looking in my car for maybe a board or anything to put underneath the tire to get traction.
Okay.
And then that's when everything started happening.
Ezra said she heard Alex coming behind her, and she turned and saw that he had a knife.
He just came at you with a knife.
Yeah.
Alex, by her account, said things to the effect, I deserve this, I want one last time.
I just felt panicked, kind of like a small animal. I was kind of scared.
Okay.
She said he was trying to attack her.
He grabbed me and he put me in the back of the car. But he kept using the he pronouns because he preferred it.
Okay.
And he used to call me boy a lot and stuff like that. He started carving boy into my arm.
Where is this on your arm?
This arm. He started cutting my pants open and stuff, and I didn't know what to do. And it was really scary.
She says at that point she was kicking and pushing him. She also said she grabbed the knife and was able to get it away from him.
How did you end up getting out?
Just kicking and stabbing anywhere and everywhere.
Ezra's confession dramatically changes the nature of the investigation for a second time.
The big question at hand is, do we have a self-defense case where Ezra killed Alex because of self-defense? Or do we have a homicide?
A closer look at Ezra's wounds does not line up with her account.
Looking at Ezra's injuries, the injuries to her hands, where she said she grabbed the blade, they're superficial. They're scratches. If someone's going to truly grab a knife blade, their hand is going to get cut wide open. The injuries to her legs, where she said Alex was cutting open her clothes, those were at arm's length. So if her arms are hanging straight down, that is where the cuts are. On both legs. There's none below the knee, there's none above the hip, and again, they're superficial.
I'm taking a look at this scenario and I'm thinking, I wonder if perhaps she staged that crime scene and gave herself these superficial cuts to give the appearance that Alex might have attacked her.
The evidence that most strongly contradicts Ezra's story is the word carved into her arm, which she says Alex did from her left.
It was carved where she was able to read it, with the B up by her elbow and the Y down by her wrist. It wasn't carved into her arm as if someone else did it from a different direction.
And then the boy carved in your arm. The part that throws me off on that is if he would have write it in, it would have been reversed, right?
Mm-hmm.
How did boy get put in your arm?
I tried to think.
He didn't do that to you, did he? You carved boy into your own arm. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
With Ezra's confession inconsistent, Detectives look to the now completed autopsy for more solid answers.
In total, Alex had 16 stab wounds in him.
Several of the wounds were post-mortem. They were inflicted on Alex after he was deceased.
If you're doing self-defense, you're gonna stab someone once, maybe twice, and then you're gonna leave. You're gonna run away. She stayed and stabbed him 16 times. So the evidence doesn't support her claim of self-defense.
Coming up, police untangle a web of lies.
She obviously wanted to be with him the most, and I think in her mind's eye, she's thinking, how do I get out of this?
And a murder plot comes into focus.
The only thing left for her to do was to kill him.
Detectives are beginning to piece together evidence that could turn their case on its head, now that it appears Ezra McCandless was the attacker, not the victim. The question is why?
Investigators ask themselves that question all the time. Why would somebody do the thing that they do? It doesn't make any rational sense to any of us. It never does.
Looking for answers, detectives dig into potential police records for everyone involved and discover this isn't the first time Ezra has reported sexual assault.
About a month prior to the homicide, Ezra had made a sexual assault allegation against a gentleman by the name of John, who was an acquaintance.
She accused him of getting her really drunk at a residence and then having sexual relations with her when she did not have the ability to say no. She actually reported that to the police.
The case was investigated by the Eau Claire Police Department.
Around February 26th of 2018, I was assigned a case by Lieutenant Piper of a sexual assault that Ezra McCandless was reporting. During the course of this investigation, I interviewed Alex Woodworth.
Ezra and Alex had just broken up 2 days earlier.
When Alex Woodworth found out that she made this report about John to the police, Alex Woodworth sided with John.
After a thorough investigation that included interviews and reviews of text and digital records, detectives closed the case, deciding it was a rare instance of false reporting. With this in mind, investigators working on Alex's murder case pull Ezra's data, and a search warrant also uncovers Ezra's personal journals.
She described Jason as the love of her life, that they shared an ancient love that would never die. She obviously wanted to be with him the most, and I think in her mind's eye, she's thinking, how do I get Jason to believe me again?
I think that she really did feel like her upbringing was relatively chaotic, and it would have been very easy for Ezra not to feel a sense of stability in her life, either physical stability or emotional stability.
Jason still cares for her, Jason's still her friend, and he helps her out where he can. Jason was everything to her, and she would do whatever needed to be done.
Texts show that before she turned on Alex, Ezra tried to convince him to help her.
She wanted Alex to get a hold of Jason and say whatever happened didn't mean anything, it was an accident. But Alex, I don't think, wanted to say that, because to him, it wasn't an accident. He says it, and it says so in their messages.
Investigators suspect that when that didn't work, Ezra developed a new strategy.
Sometimes we start seeing people develop coping mechanisms such as playing the victim role, because that seems to be the only way they sense they can get attention or affection or sympathy or a sense of control, is by manipulating other people to be perceived as the victim.
The day before Alex's murder, she sent over 600 messages to Jason. And during that time frame, she was begging to get back together with him, She was saying anything she could to make herself look like a victim. She thought Jason would maybe look at getting back together with her if she was a victim.
The culmination of everything involved with these secret affairs and the lies and suddenly became overbearing to her, and she snapped.
To investigators, the timeline suggests that day, Ezra lured Alex into a deadly trap.
I believe that her intention was to kill Alex so that she could be with Jason.
She can go back to Jason and see, look, I told you so. He was trying to sexually assault me. I did my best to fight him off. I told you the whole time that he was the bad guy, and maybe he would take her back.
On April 6, 2018, Ezra is charged with first-degree intentional homicide. But detectives know getting a conviction will be difficult.
At any case, you worry that they're going to be found not guilty. I felt the evidence pointed to her doing this intentionally and not self-defense, but I was nervous.
When the Ezra McCandless trial begins in October 2019, news media from around the country descend upon rural Wisconsin.
This case was a big deal in the media because this is a small community. This type of stuff usually doesn't happen here.
As the prosecution presents its case, Ezra's behavior does little to endear her to the jury.
She didn't show a lot of emotion. You know, no matter how much we all think that people behave differently when they're under stress, when you're having to testify and those kinds of things, we do expect certain things, at least juries do. They want to see some emotion that matches that experience, and that's not what they saw. And I think that really did work against her.
On the day Jason came in to testify, Ezra actually dressed up, wore makeup.
She removed her blazer, and underneath, she was wearing a green sweater that Jason had given to her.
And I think everyone saw that, which also I think played a role into the motive of, I want Jason back, and so I'm going to dress up for him even here and try to get his attention.
Prosecutors argue the viciousness of the stabbing, combined with the evidence at the scene, proves it wasn't self-defense.
There are so many wounds, but the one that stood out the most to me was there was a puncture wound behind Alexander's ear. Based on what I see, was something that came from behind, something that he didn't see coming.
I don't believe anyone in self-defense would try to chase someone as they try to get away.
The stab wounds were not just on one area of his body. They went from Alex's head all the way down to his legs.
As you're there, as you're frozen, as you're thinking,
yes,
what is going through your mind?
Before I even moved, what was going through my mind is he's going to do what he wants. He's going to take anything he wants. He's going to use me. I don't know what to do. I'm terrified. I couldn't move.
They're saying Alex was abusive to her. They tried to make Alex look like a monster.
He just kept saying he's been waiting for this for so long.
After you hear that, what do you do?
I kept saying out loud what's happening, what's going on. It felt like I was in a tunnel, like I could only see so much around me. And this is when I decided I needed to go. I needed to get away.
On November 1st, 2019, the jury renders its verdict.
Mr. McCandless, please rise. We, the jury, find the defendant, Ezra J. McCandless, guilty of first-degree intentional homicide.
She was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 50 years.
false allegations of sexual assault are rare. And the rare people who do them for lots of different reasons. Ezra started out not having a dad, having a mom who was so young, somebody who struggled, I think, from a mental health standpoint in a lot of different ways. I think that she had a real need for attention and wasn't quite sure how to get that. And then when she got in a relationship, she really cared about Jason. He became very, very important to her. And that sometimes those feelings, I think, in her mind, justified acting in certain ways.
Ezra's actions took away a young man who is missed by many.
Alex would be a professor. He would be living his dream. And it's very unfortunate that that was taken from him.
Texas, late summer, 1998. The air didn't move. Heat sat heavy over the asphalt like something alive, pressing down, suffocating, holding its breath. At 2:17 a.m., a truck driver pulled off a quiet county road just outside a stretch of scrubland no one bothered to name. He would later say it was the smell that made him stop. Not strong, not obvious, just wrong. Sweet, faint, and out of place in the dry Texas night. He stepped out, boots crunching over gravel, engine ticking behind him, and for a moment, everything felt too still. No wind. No insects. No sound except his own breathing. Then he saw it, something pale against the dirt, half hidden beyond a shallow ditch. At first, he thought it was trash. A tarp. A bundle someone had dumped and forgotten. But the closer he got, the more the shape refused to make sense. By 2:26 a.m., he was back in his cab, hands shaking, radio crackling as he called it in. By sunrise, the place was crawling with deputies, yellow tape cutting across the dust like a warning no one could ignore. News would come later. Headlines would follow. But in that moment, under a sky just beginning to lighten, it was quiet again, except for the low murmur of men who already knew this wasn't going to be simple. She had no name. Not yet. The body was positioned with a kind of deliberate care that felt worse than chaos. Face turned slightly away, arms at her sides. No immediate signs of struggle in the dirt around her, but that meant nothing. In Texas heat, the ground hardens fast, holds secrets better than people expect. She was young, early 20s, maybe, dark hair, tangled, clothes partially intact but disturbed enough to suggest something had gone very wrong long before she was left here. No pairs. No ID. No car nearby. No obvious reason. By mid-morning, the county sheriff's office had already started fielding calls. Reporters, nearby towns, curious locals who had heard something, seen something, imagined something. The words began forming almost immediately. Mysterious discovery, unidentified victim, possible homicide. And then the one that would stick for years. Cold case. Except it wasn't cold yet. Not even close. Detectives moved fast. They always do in the beginning, when the clock still feels like an ally instead of an enemy. The first 48 hours, everyone knows the rule. Names get checked. Missing persons reports pulled. Nearby businesses canvassed. Truck stops, diners, gas stations. Faces blur together. Stories overlap. People remember things they didn't see, forget things they did. A waitress 30 miles away thought she recognized the description. A girl who came in alone, quiet, nervous, paid cash, left before finishing her coffee. That lead went nowhere. A mechanic swore he'd seen a car parked near the road the night before.
Dark colored sedan.
Maybe blue, maybe black. He couldn't be sure. That lead dissolved too. Piece by piece, the urgency began to thin, stretched across miles of empty land and too many unanswered questions. Back at the medical examiner's office, the details sharpened. Cause of death. Undetermined at first, then slowly, carefully, narrowed down. There were signs, subtle, but undeniable. Evidence of restraint. Evidence of control. Whoever had done this hadn't panicked. This wasn't random. It wasn't messy. It was quiet, methodical, personal. And then the first real break, or what felt like one. Fingerprints. They ran them through every database available in 1998. Local, state, federal. Hours turned into days. Days into a week. Nothing. No match. No record. It was as if she had never existed inside any system that mattered. No name. No past. No one looking for her. Or worse, no one who knew where to look. The community started to feel it then. That slow, creeping unease that settles in when something doesn't resolve the way it should. This wasn't supposed to happen here. Not in a place where people recognized each other at the grocery store, where strangers stood out, where roads didn't lead anywhere unless you meant to go there. And yet, someone had come here. Someone had done this. Someone had left her behind like a secret they believed would never be uncovered. Weeks passed. The case stayed active, but the noise around it began to fade. New stories replaced old ones. New crimes took the front page. The headlines changed, but the file didn't. It thickened. Notes stacked on notes. Interviews, timelines, dead ends. Detective Ray Alvarez kept it on his desk longer than most. He was the kind of investigator who didn't like loose ends, didn't trust them, said they had a way of coming back when you least expected it. He studied the photos more than he should have. The angles, the positioning, the details others might overlook. Something about it bothered him. Not just the act, but the precision of it. This wasn't a first time, he said once late, to no one in particular. No one argued. They expanded the search radius, looked into similar cases, patterns, anything that might connect. But 1998 wasn't built for easy answers. No advanced DNA databases. No instant cross-state matches. If someone moved, changed names, disappeared into another county, or another life, they stayed gone. Months turned into a year. Still no ID. They buried her under a temporary marker. Jane Doe, Texas, 1998. That was all the world knew. And then slowly, inevitably, the case shifted. From active to inactive. From urgent to archived. From a name that might be found to a file that gathered dust. Cold case. The words carried weight now. Not just a label, but a quiet admission of defeat. But some things don't stay buried. Not completely. In the years that followed, the file would be reopened more than once. New detectives. New eyes. New technology that promised more than it could always deliver. Each time, hope flickered, brief, fragile, and then dimmed again when nothing concrete surfaced. But the evidence remained. Carefully stored, preserved, waiting. DNA. In 1998, it was a tool. By the early 2000s, it was becoming something else, something sharper, more precise. Databases expanded. Techniques improved. Cases once thought impossible began to crack open in other states, other counties, other forgotten files. And somewhere in that quiet evidence room, labeled and sealed, her case waited its turn. No one could have predicted how long it would take. Or what it would uncover. Because the truth, when it finally began to surface, didn't come from a confession. It didn't come from a witness suddenly remembering the right detail. It came from something colder, more clinical. A strand of genetic code that had been sitting in silence for years, holding on to a story no one had been able to hear. Until the technology caught up. Until someone somewhere decided to try again. And when they did, the result didn't just reopen a case. It shattered it. Because the name that came back, the match hidden in decades of data, wasn't a stranger drifting through Texas. It was someone who had been living a life. Working. Talking. Blending in. Someone who had never truly disappeared. And suddenly, the quiet road outside that nameless stretch of land didn't feel so empty anymore. It felt connected. like a thread pulled tight across time, linking a hot, silent night in 1998 to a present that had no idea what was about to surface. The arrest, when it finally came, would shock more than just a small Texas community. It would force people to look back at what they missed, what they ignored, what they never imagined could be hiding in plain sight. But in that first moment, back under that suffocating sky, none of that existed yet. There was only the body, the silence, and the question that refused to go away. Who was she, and who made sure no one would know? The file never really closed. It just stopped breathing. Years passed the way they always do in small counties, quietly, without ceremony. New deputies came in, old ones retired. Desks changed hands, but the folder marked Jane Doe, Texas, 1998 stayed exactly where it had been left. Brown edges curling. Photographs fading just enough to feel older than they were. A life reduced to paper, sealed in a cabinet that only opened when someone decided to remember. Detective Ray Alvarez never stopped remembering. He carried it differently than the others. Not obsession, he would deny that, but something close. A weight that didn't shift no matter how many other cases came and went. He'd solved murders before. Clean ones. Messy ones. Crimes that made sense once you pulled them apart. But this one refused to settle. It stayed incomplete, like a sentence that never reached its final word. By 2003, the landscape of investigation had started to change. Slowly, quietly. DNA was no longer just a supporting detail, it was becoming the center. Labs were expanding, databases growing. Cases across the country were being reopened, re-examined, rewritten. Names were being found where there had been none. Alvarez saw it coming before most. He pulled a file again one humid afternoon, the kind where the air clings to your skin and makes everything feel heavier than it should. He spread the contents across his desk, photos, reports, timelines, and stopped at the evidence log. Item 14. Biological sample. Preserved. He stared at it longer than necessary. Then he made the call. The lab technician on the other end sounded cautious. Backlogs. Limited resources. Priority cases stacking up. This one was old. Cold. No guarantee of anything new. I don't need a guarantee, Alvarez said. I need a chance. Weeks turned into months. The process was slow, deliberate. Extraction, amplification, comparison. Each step carried the possibility of failure. Degradation. Contamination. Too little to work with. Too much time passed. And then, one morning the call came back. Partial profile. Not a full hit. Not enough for immediate identification. But something. A genetic outline. A starting point. For the first time in years, the case shifted. It was subtle.
No headlines.
No sudden breakthroughs splashed across the news. Just a quiet adjustment deep inside the system. A file that had been dormant now flagged for review. A profile entered into databases that were still growing, still learning how to connect the dots between strangers. CODIS, the combined DNA index system, was still expanding then, still incomplete. Matches were rare, especially for unidentified victims. But Alvarez understood something others didn't want to admit. You don't need a full answer to start pulling threads. They widened the net again. This time differently. Not just local missing persons. Not just nearby counties. They looked broader, state lines, transient populations, shelters, undocumented disappearances that never made it into official systems. Women who slipped through gaps. Women who vanished without noise. One name surfaced briefly. A young woman reported missing in New Mexico, late 1997. Similar age. Similar description. The family had searched for months before the trail went cold. Alvarez followed it personally, driving hours across desert highways that looked too much like the one where she had been found. He sat with the family, listened, watched their faces when he described what little they knew. It wasn't her. Hope lifted, then dropped again, harder than before. Back in Texas, The community had mostly moved on. The story had become something people referenced in passing, like a storm that hit years ago or a fire that burned out before it spread. New residents didn't know it at all. Old ones remembered just enough to feel uncomfortable when it came up. But there were whispers. Always whispers. A woman at a gas station claimed she remembered seeing headlights out near that road around the time it happened. Not passing through, stopped. Engine off. Sitting in the dark.
She hadn't reported it then. Didn't think it mattered.
A ranch hand said he heard something that night. Not a scream. Not exactly. More like a sharp sound cut short.
He dismissed it at the time.
Animals. Wind. Something explainable. Individually, the details meant nothing. Together, they started to form a pattern Alvarez couldn't ignore. Someone had been there. Someone had stayed long enough to leave something behind and take something with them. The problem wasn't absence of clues.
It was distance from them.
Time had stretched everything thin. Memories faded. Landscapes changed. Roads repaved. Land sold. Divided, repurposed. The exact spot where she had been found didn't even look the same anymore. The ditch filled in. The brush cut back.
It was cleaner now.
Almost normal. That bothered him more than the original scene. Because normal erases things. And this case refused to be erased. By 2008, the investigation had reached another plateau. The DNA profile remained in the system, waiting for a match that never came. Leads circled back on themselves. Interviews repeated with nothing new added. The file grew heavier, but not clearer. Then something unexpected happened. Not a breakthrough.
A mistake.
A routine audit in the lab flagged a series of older entries for reprocessing, samples that had been analyzed under earlier, less precise methods. Jane Doe's profile was among them. It wasn't a priority. It wasn't urgent. But it was scheduled. The updated process took weeks again, but this time, the result came back sharper. More complete. More defined. Not perfect, but closer. Close enough to do something they couldn't before. Familial searching. It wasn't standard practice yet. Not widely accepted. Too many ethical questions. Too many variables. But in certain cases with no other path, it was allowed. Alvarez didn't hesitate. If she's in there, he said, someone connected to her is too. The search ran quietly.
No announcements. No expectations.
Just data moving through systems, comparing fragments of identity against millions of others, looking for something that resembled connection. Days passed. Then weeks. Then a partial hit. Not to her. To someone else. A male profile. Distant, but not unrelated. Enough shared markers to suggest family.
Cousin maybe.
Extended line. Not close, but not random. It was the first real thread they'd had in a decade. They traced it carefully. The name attached to the profile belonged to a man with a minor record. Nothing violent. A few arrests. Petty offenses. He lived 2 states away. No known connection to Texas. No known reason to be tied to a body found in 1998. But DNA doesn't lie about blood. Alvarez and his team followed the line backward. Family trees. Birth records. Old addresses. Names that branched and split and spread across states. It was slow work. Meticulous. Every connection had to be verified. Every assumption tested. And then, buried deep in a cluster of records from the late 1970s. A missing name. A young woman. Last seen leaving a small town. Never reported found. Never officially closed. The details were thin. Almost nothing to go on.
But the timeline. The age.
It aligned too closely to ignore. For the first time, Jane Doe began to feel like someone real.
Not just a body.
Not just evidence. A person who had existed, moved through the world, been seen, been known, before disappearing into silence. The possibility changed everything. Because if they could name her, they could find who last saw her alive. And if they could find that, they might finally understand who had been waiting in the dark on that Texas road. But the deeper they dug, the more unsettling the connections became. Because the family line didn't just lead to her. It led to someone else. Someone who had been in Texas in 1998. And suddenly, the distance between past and present collapsed. What had once felt like an isolated act, random, contained, forgotten, now looked like something else entirely. Something connected. Something deliberate. And for the first time in years, the case didn't feel cold anymore. It felt like it was waking up. Slowly. Reluctantly. But unmistakably alive. The name didn't arrive with certainty. It never does in cases like this. It came in fragments, records that didn't quite line up, addresses that overlapped just enough to raise suspicion, a trail of paper that felt incomplete but persistent, like something trying to surface through layers of time. For years, she had been nothing more than a body on a roadside. Now, she was becoming a possibility. The missing woman in the records was listed under a name that hadn't been spoken in decades. Disappeared in late 1997. Small town. No formal investigation beyond an initial report that went nowhere. No media coverage. No urgency. Just a quiet note filed away in a system that rarely looked back. Her family had assumed she left. That was the story they told themselves. She needed space. She wanted something different. She'll call. But she never did. Alvarez sat with a file open in front of him, the air inside the station thick, with a hum of old fluorescent lights. He read the report again, slower this time. Last seen leaving a convenience store. Alone. No signs of distress. No witnesses who noticed anything unusual. No reason to vanish. Except she did. And now, more than 10 years later, her absence was brushing up against a body found hundreds of miles away under circumstances that refused to be ignored. The connection wasn't proven. Not yet. But it was enough. They reached out to what remained of her family.
It took time.
People move. Names change. Relationships fracture. By the time they located her older sister, the voice on the other end of the phone carried the kind of hesitation that only comes from years of not expecting answers. When Alvarez introduced himself, there was a pause. Then a single question. Is this about her? He didn't answer immediately.
He didn't need to.
The silence said everything. Arrangements were made. A meeting. A conversation that had been waiting for more than a decade. Alvarez drove out again, further this time, into a town that felt even smaller than the last. Faded signage. Empty storefronts. The kind of place where people knew each other once, but maybe not anymore. The sister met him at the door. Older now, tired in a way that wasn't just physical. She didn't cry. Not at first. She just listened as he explained what little they had. A body. A timeline. A possibility. Then he showed her the photo. Not the crime scene. Never that. A reconstruction. An approximation of what Jane Doe might have looked like before everything went wrong. The reaction was immediate. A hand over her mouth. A sharp intake of breath. Eyes that searched the image not for proof, but for recognition. That's her, she said, voice breaking under the weight of something she had been holding onto for too long. That's my sister. It wasn't confirmation, but it was enough to move forward. DNA samples were collected. Carefully, respectfully. The process had become routine by now, but the moment never lost its gravity.
A swab.
A label. A chain of custody that carried more than just evidence. It carried hope. Back at the lab, the comparison began. This time, the weight felt different.
Shorter. Heavier.
Every hour stretched with the possibility that this case that had refused to resolve for so long, might finally take a shape they could understand. When the results came in, they didn't hesitate.
Match.
Not partial. Not approximate. Definitive. Jane Doe was no longer Jane Doe. She had a name. A history. A family that had never stopped wondering what happened. And suddenly, everything changed. Because identifying the victim doesn't just close one question. It opens dozens more. Where had she been in those final days? Who had she been with? Why Texas? Why that road? Alvarez went back through the timeline, this time with new eyes. Every detail took on weight. Every gap became something that needed to be filled. The last confirmed sighting in 1997. Then nothing. No bank activity.
No employment.
No official records. She had disappeared cleanly. Too cleanly. Which meant one thing. Someone had helped her disappear. Or made sure she couldn't be found. The familial DNA hit that had started this chain reaction now came back into focus. The distant relative. The male profile. The one that had seemed like a loose thread before now felt central. They dug deeper into that branch of the family. Names emerged. Dozens at first, then narrowed. Cross-referenced with geography, age, criminal history. Patterns began to form. Not clear ones, not obvious, but enough to guide the search. One name surfaced more than once. Not because of a violent record. Because of proximity. He had lived in Texas in the late 90s. Not permanently. Passing through. Working temporary jobs. Construction. Transport. The kind of work that didn't leave much of a paper trail, but moved a person across state lines without raising questions. His name didn't stand out at first. It wasn't flagged in any major database. No history of violent crime.
No outstanding warrants.
Just present. In the wrong place. At the wrong time. Alvarez circled it anyway. Then he looked closer. Employment records placed him within 50 miles of where the body had been found. Gas receipts, old, archived, barely legible, showed transactions along the same highway corridor. Witness descriptions from 1998, vague as they were, began to feel less random. A dark vehicle. A man alone. Late at night. It wasn't enough for an arrest. Not even close. But it was more than they had ever had. They brought him in quietly. No media.
No announcement.
Just a request to talk. He showed up calm.
Too calm.
Mid-40s now, older than he had been when the crime occurred, but not changed in any way that suggested time had weighed on him. Clean clothes, steady posture, eyes that moved just enough to take everything in without giving anything away. Alvarez watched him carefully.
People always reveal something. Not always what you expect.
But something. The interview room was small, controlled, neutral, a place designed to make silence uncomfortable. But he didn't seem uncomfortable. Not at first. Alvarez started simple. Background, work history, places he'd lived, routine questions that build a baseline. The man answered easily. Too easily.
No hesitation.
No visible stress. Just a steady stream of information that felt practiced. Then Alvarez shifted. Do you remember being in Texas in 1998? A pause. Brief. Almost invisible. But it was there. I've been a lot of places, the man said. That was a long time ago. Alvarez nodded. Expected. Then he placed a photograph on the table. Not the victim. The road. The exact stretch where the body had been found. The man glanced at it. Just a second. But his eyes stayed there a fraction longer than necessary. Recognition. It flickered, then disappeared. Looks like a road, he said. Flat. Dismissive. But something had shifted. Alvarez leaned back slightly. Changed tone. You ever drive out there at night?
No.
Too quick. The first crack.
Small.
But real. Silence filled the room again. He let it sit. People hate silence. They fill it. Explain it. Try to control it. The man shifted in his chair. Just enough. Why am I here? He asked. Alvarez didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into the folder. Pulled out another document. Set it down slowly. DNA report. Not fully explained. Not yet. Just visible. The man looked at it.
Didn't touch it. Didn't need to.
Because now he understood. Not everything. But enough. And for the first time since he walked into the room, he hesitated. Not long. But long enough. Because somewhere, deep beneath years of distance, routine, and whatever story he had built for himself, something had just caught up to him. And the past, buried under heat and silence and decades of dust, was no longer staying buried. The room didn't change, but the air inside it did. It thickened, like pressure building behind a sealed door, subtle at first, then undeniable. The man sat still, but not the same way he had when he walked in. His shoulders were tighter now, his breathing just slightly off rhythm. Small things. Almost invisible. But in a place like this, small things were everything. Alvarez didn't rush. He had learned long ago that truth doesn't come from force. It comes from weight. From letting a person feel exactly how much the ground beneath them has started to shift. You said you've been a lot of places, Alvarez began, voice steady, almost casual. Construction. Transport. Moving around. The man nodded.
Yeah.
No permanent address back then? Not really. People remember you? A shrug.
Some might.
Alvarez let that sit, then leaned forward just enough to change the tone without raising his voice. Because someone remembered that road. The man didn't respond. But his eyes did. A flicker.
Quick.
Defensive. Alvarez saw it. Filed it away. You're not in trouble for traveling, Alvarez continued. You're not in trouble for working jobs across states. That's not why you're here. Another pause. Longer this time. Then why am I here? The man asked again, but the edge in his voice had sharpened. Less curiosity now. More calculation. Alvarez slid the DNA report a little closer across the table.
This, he said.
The man looked down at it again. His jaw tightened just slightly. It doesn't mean anything, he said too quickly. You haven't even heard what it means yet. Silence. A crack widening. Alvarez didn't fill it right away. He let the hum of the overhead light settle into the space between them, let the seconds stretch. Then, it connects you, he said, measured, precise, to someone who's connected to her. No name. Not yet. The man leaned back in his chair, arms crossing instinctively, a barrier forming without him realizing it. I don't know who her is, he said. Alvarez nodded. That's interesting, he replied, because I didn't say her name. Another pause. Longer. He shifted again. Subtle. But enough. You're reaching, the man added, trying to regain control. You've got nothing. Alvarez studied him for a moment, then reached into the folder again. This time he pulled out something older. A photograph. Not the crime scene. Not even the reconstruction. A still image from a surveillance camera. Grainy. Black and white. Time-stamped late 1997. A convenience store. A young woman at the counter. The last confirmed image of her alive. He placed it on the table without a word. The man's eyes dropped to it. And stayed there. Too long. That was the moment. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just stillness. The kind that says something inside a person has just recognized something it didn't expect to see again. Alvarez didn't interrupt it. He let it happen. Watched as the man's breathing changed again, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. You ever seen her before? Alvarez asked quietly. The man didn't answer right away. His eyes moved away from the photo, then back again. No, he said finally. But it wasn't the same voice as before. Less certain. Less controlled. Alvarez leaned in slightly. You're sure? Yes. Too fast. Again. The pattern repeating. Alvarez shifted tactics. He pulled out a map. Old. Folded at the edges. Marked with faded ink. He spread it across the table, flattening it with his hand. This is where she was last seen, he said, tapping a small town far outside Texas. Then his finger moved, slowly, tracing a path across highways, counties, empty land. And this is where she was found. The distance between the 2 points stretched across the paper, like a question that had never been answered. You spent time along this route, Alvarez continued. The man shook his head. No. But this time, there was hesitation before the word. A fraction of a second. Enough. Alvarez didn't challenge it directly. Instead, he shifted again. Gas receipts place you here, he said, tapping a spot along the highway. Late December, 1997. The man's eyes flicked up. You said you don't remember Texas, Alvarez added. I said I've been a lot of places. Right. Alvarez nodded slowly. Then he leaned back. Changed pace. You know what's interesting about memory, he said. People forget details. Dates. Times. But they don't forget moments. No response. They don't forget nights that feel different. Still nothing. They don't forget things they shouldn't have seen, or things they did that they tell themselves didn't happen. The man shifted again. Hands uncrossing. Then crossing again. A loop. I didn't do anything, he said. It was the first denial that came without a question attached. Alvarez heard it. So, did the silence that followed. I didn't say you did, Alvarez replied. The man's jaw tightened. Then why? Because you're here, Alvarez cut in, calm but firm. Because your DNA doesn't just connect you to some random person. It connects you to a family. To her. The word landed heavier this time. Her. Not Jane Doe. Not a case file. A person. The man looked away. Toward the wall. Anywhere but the table. You can keep saying you don't remember, Alvarez continued, voice steady. You can keep telling yourself this doesn't matter, but it does. No answer. Because she has a name now. That got him. Not a full reaction. Not a confession. But something deeper. A shift that moved past defense and into something closer to awareness. People are looking for answers, Alvarez added. They've been waiting a long time. The man's fingers tapped once against the table. Stopped. Then again. A rhythm breaking through. You don't understand, he said quietly. It was the first time his voice had dropped. The first time it carried something other than resistance. Alvarez didn't move. Didn't interrupt. Then help me, he said. The man shook his head. Slow. I can't. Not I didn't. Not I won't. I can't. Another crack. Deeper this time. Alvarez leaned forward again, just enough to bring the focus back. Can't or won't. Silence. Heavy. The kind that fills every corner of a room. The man stared at the table, eyes fixed on nothing. You don't know what it was like, he said finally. There it was. Not a confession. But a doorway. Alvarez stayed still. Every instinct telling him not to push too hard. Not yet. Tell me, he said. The man exhaled slowly. Long. Controlled. But underneath it, something was slipping. She got in the car, he said. The words came out flat. Almost disconnected. But they changed everything. Alvarez didn't react outwardly. Didn't lean in. Didn't interrupt. Just listened. She needed a ride, the man continued. Said she was heading west. Didn't have much. Just got in. His eyes lifted slightly. Not to Alvarez. To the space just beyond him. Like he was looking at something that wasn't in the room. I didn't think anything of it. A pause. Then. She shouldn't have trusted me. The room went completely still. No movement. No sound except the faint buzz overhead. Because now, the past wasn't just catching up. It was starting to speak. And once it started, it wasn't going to stop. The words didn't land all at once. They settled slowly, like dust in a room that hadn't been opened in years, revealing shapes that had always been there but never fully seen. She got in the car. Alvarez didn't move. Not a shift, not a breath out of place. Moments like this were fragile. Push too hard, and they collapse. Move too fast, and they disappear. He had seen it before, confessions that dissolved into silence because someone tried to force them into the light too quickly. So he let it breathe. The man's eyes stayed fixed somewhere past the table, unfocused, locked onto a memory that had been sealed off for years. His hands, once controlled, now rested flat against the surface, fingers spread slightly as if grounding himself in something real. Where? Alvarez asked quietly. A long pause. Then. Near store, the man said. Late. She was alone. The same store. The same grainy footage. The timeline aligning in a way that felt too precise to ignore. She said she needed to get out, he continued. Didn't say from what. Just out. His voice wasn't defensive anymore. It wasn't even steady. It was distant. Like he wasn't speaking to Alvarez but to something behind him. Something older. You didn't ask? Alvarez said. I didn't care. Flat. Honest. The kind of honesty that doesn't try to make itself look better. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Alvarez leaned forward just enough. What happened next? The man's jaw tightened. A flicker of resistance. But it didn't hold.
We drove, he said. Hours.
Maybe more. I don't remember exactly. You crossed into Texas.
A nod.
Barely there. She fell asleep at some point, he added, in the passenger seat. His fingers curled slightly against the table. Unconscious. Tension bleeding through. And when she woke up, Alvarez pressed. Another pause. Longer. He swallowed. She asked where we were. And what did you tell her? The man shook his head. I don't remember. But this time, it wasn't a lie that tried to convince. It was a lie that tried to hide. Alvarez let it pass.
For now.
Did she try to leave? He asked instead. The man's eyes closed briefly. A single second. But enough to say yes without words. She realized, he said. Realized what? That something was off. His voice dropped lower. She started asking questions. Too many. Alvarez felt the shift. The moment where the story stopped being passive. Stopped being something that happened. And became something that was done. What did you do? He asked. Silence. The kind that presses against your ears. The man's breathing changed again. Faster now. Less controlled. I told her to calm down, he said. Did she?
No. A beat.
She got scared. The word hung there.
Scared.
Simple. But heavy. What did you do? Alvarez repeated. This time, there was no avoiding it. The man's hands clenched. Then loosened. Then clenched again. A loop he couldn't break. I pulled over, he said. The room seemed smaller now. The walls closer. The air tighter. Where? I don't know. Just somewhere off the road. The same road. The same stretch of empty land. The same place no one noticed until it was too late. She tried to get out, he continued. Open the door before the car even stopped. His voice cracked slightly. The first real fracture. I grabbed her. There it was. The line crossed. Not implied. Not suggested. Spoken. She was yelling, he added, saying she'd report me, saying people would be looking for her. Alvarez didn't interrupt.
Didn't soften. Didn't react.
He let the weight of those words settle exactly where they belonged. And then, he asked. The man shook his head again. Faster this time. I didn't mean to. But the sentence didn't finish. Because it didn't need to. Intent doesn't erase outcome. It just reshapes how someone lives with it. You restrained her, Alvarez said, filling the gap. The man didn't respond. Which was answer enough. With what? Another pause. Something in the car, he said. I don't remember exactly. But the evidence had already shown it. Signs of restraint. Control. Method. You kept her there, Alvarez continued, on the side of the road. The man's eyes dropped again. Yes. How long? I don't know. Time bends in moments like that. Stretches.
Breaks.
Refuses to behave.
She kept talking, he said.
Kept trying to reason with me. A bitter edge crept into his voice. Like that was going to fix anything. Alvarez caught it. The shift from memory to justification.
Small.
But dangerous. And what did you do? The question landed harder now. Because there were fewer places left to hide. The man exhaled slowly.
Long.
Like he was trying to push something out of himself. She wouldn't stop, he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. And then... silence.
Long.
Heavy. The kind that stretches until it almost breaks. Alvarez didn't move.
Didn't speak.
Didn't interrupt. Because this part had to come on its own. I made her stop. The words were quiet, but they filled the entire room. Not graphic. Not detailed. Just final. Alvarez felt the shift settle. The confession wasn't complete. Not legally. Not yet. But the truth was there.
Raw.
Unfiltered. And impossible to take back. What happened after? Alvarez asked, voice steady. The man's shoulders sagged slightly. Like something inside him had finally given way. I stayed there for a while, he said. I don't know how long. His eyes moved again. Not to the photo. Not to the map. Just nowhere. Then I moved her. Careful. Deliberate. Just like the scene had shown. I didn't want it to look, he stopped. Didn't finish. But Alvarez understood. Didn't want it to look chaotic. Didn't want it to look like what it was. So you placed her, Alvarez said. A nod.
Small.
Yes. Why there? Another pause. Then. Because no one goes there. A simple answer. And for years. He had been right. The room fell quiet again. But it wasn't the same silence as before. This one carried weight. Resolution. And something darker underneath. Because even now, even with the truth starting to surface, there was still something missing. Alvarez leaned forward one last time. Eyes steady. Voice calm. You left, he said. Yes. And then? The man hesitated. Not like before. This was different. Deeper. More guarded. And then what? Alvarez pressed. The man looked up for the first time in several minutes. Directly at him. And in that look, there was something new. Not fear. Not guilt. Something else. Something that hadn't been there before. I kept driving, he said.
A beat.
Then, like nothing happened. The words landed colder than anything else he had said. Because that was the part that never made sense. Not the crime. Not the moment. But the aftermath. The ability to walk away. To disappear. To live. While everything else stayed frozen in that one place. On that one night. On that one road. And as Alvarez sat there, watching him, listening to the pieces fall into place, one thought pushed through everything else. This wasn't the end. Not yet. Because people who can do that, people who can walk away like nothing happened, don't always do it just once. And suddenly, The case wasn't just about what had been found. It was about what might still be hidden. Waiting. Unseen. Just beyond the edge of what anyone had thought to look for. The confession changed everything. But it did not answer the question that had haunted investigators from the beginning. Who was she? That question had finally been answered. But another one immediately took its place. Was she the only one? Inside the sheriff's office, the mood shifted from relief to something much darker. For years, investigators had chased a single shadow, a missing woman, a forgotten roadside, a case that refused to move. Now, the shadow had a shape, a face, a voice sitting across from them in an interrogation room. But the moment a killer begins talking, investigators know something important. A confession is not always the end. Sometimes it is the beginning. Detective Alvarez understood that better than anyone. He had spent years trying to understand how someone could commit an act so calculated and then disappear back into ordinary life. The answer was no longer hidden. The man in the interview room had done exactly that. He drove away. He went home. He continued living. And for more than 2 decades, the world kept turning. But now investigators had to know what happened before that night. And what happened after. Because the most terrifying question in any investigation is rarely what someone did once. It is what they might have done before. The moment the interview ended, the case exploded into a new phase. Old records were reopened. Archived reports were pulled. Missing persons databases were searched again. Every place the suspect had lived, worked, or passed through became a potential crime scene. The timeline was reconstructed piece by piece. Late 1997. Early 1998. The suspect's movements. His jobs. His temporary residences. The names of people who remembered him. And slowly, investigators began noticing something unsettling. He moved often. Too often. Not enough to look suspicious. Just enough to avoid leaving a permanent trail. A few months in one town. A job that ended suddenly. An apartment rented under circumstances no one remembered clearly. Then gone. A pattern built around disappearing before anyone had a reason to look for him. Investigators contacted former coworkers. Most remembered very little. That was the strange part. Not that people remembered something bad. They didn't. They remembered almost nothing. He was quiet. He kept to himself. Seemed normal. Those words appeared again and again. Normal. The most dangerous description anyone can give. Because people imagine evil as something obvious, something visible, something that announces itself. But history repeatedly proves otherwise. Sometimes the person who creates the greatest fear is the person no one ever noticed. One former coworker remembered something that caught investigators' attention. A conversation. Years earlier. The suspect had made a comment about people disappearing. A strange joke. Something dark enough to feel uncomfortable, but not serious enough that anyone reported it. At the time, everyone laughed it off. Now, they looked back differently. Memory is a dangerous thing. After an arrest, people search the past looking for signs they missed. Sometimes they find real warnings. Sometimes they find only coincidence. Investigators had to separate the two. They couldn't build a case on feelings. They needed evidence. And evidence was exactly what they began searching for. The first major breakthrough came when detectives looked deeper into his travel history. There were gaps. Large ones. Months where nobody could account for where he had been. Years where his name appeared nowhere. That alone proved nothing. Millions of people disappear into paperwork gaps every day. But combined with the confession, those gaps became impossible to ignore. Then came another discovery. A missing woman's report from a neighboring state. The case had been sitting untouched for years. Young woman. Late 20s. Last seen getting into a vehicle after leaving work. No body recovered. No suspect identified. At first glance, there was no connection. Different year. Different location. Different circumstances. But investigators noticed one detail. The suspect had lived nearby during that exact period. The possibility was enough to reopen the file. Families who had spent years without answers suddenly received phone calls they never expected. The kind of calls that create hope and fear at the same time. Your case is being reviewed again. Those words can change a person's life. Because for families of missing people, time does not erase the question. It only makes the silence heavier. Back in Texas, the suspect's confession continued to be analyzed. Every word. Every pause. Every detail. Investigators compared his story against physical evidence from 1998. Some details matched. Others created new questions. He remembered certain things clearly, but forgot others conveniently. A classic pattern. Selective memory. He remembered enough to explain away what happened, but not enough to reveal everything. Alvarez noticed something during the original interrogation. The suspect never described the victim as a stranger. Not once. He spoke about her actions, her reactions, her fear. He remembered conversations, small details, details that suggested familiarity. That bothered investigators. Because people don't usually remember meaningless encounters decades later. Unless that encounter meant something. Or unless they spent a very long time trying to forget it. The search expanded again. This time, investigators looked for patterns beyond geography. They examined unsolved cases involving women who vanished along travel routes. Women last seen near highways. Women whose final moments involve someone offering help. A ride. A conversation. A promise. The same type of vulnerability. The same opening. The same opportunity. The phrase began appearing in internal discussions. A predator's method. Not a random act. A system. Someone who understood how to approach. How to gain trust. How to disappear afterward. As investigators worked through old files, another unsettling possibility emerged. The 1998 case might not have been the beginning. It might have been the moment someone finally got caught. That distinction changed everything. Because if that was true, somewhere out there were families who had spent years believing their loved ones simply vanished. Families who never received the truth. Families still waiting. The suspect remained silent about other cases. He denied involvement. Even after the confession. Even after admitting what happened in Texas. When asked about other missing women, his answers became shorter. I don't know. I don't remember. I can't help you. The same phrases. Different questions. Investigators recognized the strategy. Limit the damage. Admit only what cannot be denied. Protect everything else. But DNA had already done something powerful. It had broken the wall. For 20 years, the case survived because technology was not ready. Now technology had found the crack. And once the crack appeared, everything behind it started pushing forward. The community that had forgotten the case began paying attention again. Old newspaper articles resurfaced. Residents who had lived nearby in 1998 spoke to reporters. People walked the same roads where investigators once searched. And many asked the same painful question. How had someone lived so close to the truth for so long? How had a person connected to such a devastating crime moved through society unnoticed? The answer was uncomfortable. Because sometimes the biggest mystery is not how someone committed a crime. It is how easily they returned to normal afterward. The arrest solved one part of the cold case. But it opened another chapter filled with uncertainty. More files waited. More names waited. More families waited. And somewhere inside the old records, buried beneath years of dust and forgotten paperwork, investigators believed there might be more stories connected to the same person. The man who thought the road would keep his secret. The man who believed time would protect him. The man who learned too late that some evidence does not disappear. It waits. And now, after decades of silence, it was speaking again. The arrest made headlines. But the investigation was far from over. Because solving a cold case is not always about finding the person responsible. Sometimes, the hardest part begins after the handcuffs go on. For 20 years, families had lived with uncertainty. They had waited beside silent phones. They had opened old photographs and wondered if the answers would ever come. They had watched other cases get solved while theirs remained frozen in time. Now, one case had finally broken open. But investigators knew something. A single confession can explain one night. It cannot explain a lifetime. And that was what haunted them. The suspect had spent years moving through different places, leaving behind almost no trace. Different towns, different jobs, different names appearing in different records. A life built around temporary connections and forgotten conversations. But people leave marks. Even when they think they don't. The investigation team created a timeline stretching back decades. Every address. Every workplace. Every vehicle. Every known relationship. A map slowly began covering the walls of the investigation room. Lines connected cities. Dates connected movements. And every connection created another question. Where else had he been? Who else had crossed paths with him? Who else had disappeared after meeting someone who seemed ordinary? The first step was reviewing missing persons cases. Thousands of names. Thousands of stories. Most had nothing to do with him. But investigators weren't looking for certainty at first. They were looking for patterns. Young women. Unexplained disappearances. Last seen near roads, gas stations, workplaces, or places where strangers naturally interact. Cases where there was no obvious struggle. No clear suspect. No final answer. The kind of cases that become forgotten because there is nothing dramatic to keep them alive. Just absence. Just silence. One file caught their attention. A woman who disappeared years before the Texas victim was found. Her case had been considered a possible runaway situation. That explanation was common. Too common. When someone disappears without evidence of violence, investigators often face a difficult reality. People want answers. But the evidence may not provide them. Families are left fighting against assumptions. She left. She started over. She didn't want contact. Sometimes those things happen. But sometimes they become excuses that allow a crime to hide. Investigators reopened the file. They examined old interviews, old photographs, old evidence. And one detail stood out. A witness had mentioned a man offering the missing woman a ride shortly before she vanished. The description was vague. The memory was years old. But the timing was enough to raise concern. The suspect was living nearby. Not proof, but another thread. Another possible connection. Alvarez understood the danger of chasing every similarity. Cold cases are full of coincidences. A person's name appearing near a case does not make them responsible. A familiar pattern does not always mean the same person created it. But ignoring patterns could cost more answers. So they kept digging. The suspect's life became a timeline of unanswered spaces. There were periods where he claimed he couldn't remember where he had been. Investigators knew memory could fade, especially over decades. But certain gaps were too convenient. He remembered ordinary moments.
Jobs.
Apartments. People he met briefly. But when the questions became more serious, the memories disappeared. The same man who remembered a conversation from 1998 suddenly couldn't remember entire months. That contradiction became impossible to ignore. Then came the search of old personal records. Notebooks. Addresses. Receipts. Photographs. Anything that could reveal where he had been. The search wasn't about finding one magical piece of evidence. It was about rebuilding a lost history. Because the truth was hidden in the details. A phone number written on a piece of paper. A location circled on a map. A name appearing twice. Small things. Almost meaningless alone. But together, they could tell a story. The suspect's defense team argued that investigators were trying to turn coincidence into guilt. They said the passage of time made memories unreliable. They questioned whether old evidence could truly prove anything decades later. And legally, they had a point. Cold cases are difficult because time damages everything. Evidence fades. Witnesses age.
People die.
Technology changes. But sometimes time also creates opportunities. Because people change. And the world around them changes with them. The same person who escaped detention in 1998 could not escape modern databases forever. The same evidence that was incomplete decades earlier could become powerful later. Technology had transformed the case. But technology alone wasn't enough. It needed someone willing to look again. That was the difference. Someone opened the old file. Someone asked the question everyone else had stopped asking. What if there was still something there? As investigators continued reviewing possible connections, they discovered another unsettling detail. The suspect had been questioned before. Not for murder. Not for a major crime. But his name had appeared in other investigations. Minor incidents. Situations that never developed into charges. Nothing that would have stopped him. Nothing that would have exposed what investigators now believed might have been hidden beneath the surface. It created a painful realization. Sometimes the warning signs are not invisible. They are simply misunderstood. A strange comment. A suspicious behavior. A feeling someone couldn't explain. But feelings are not evidence. And without evidence, cases remain unsolved. The investigation continued across state lines. Detectives contacted agencies that had never considered their cases connected. Files were compared. Names were checked. Dates were aligned. The possibility of multiple victims became the center of the investigation. The media began calling him a serial offender. But investigators were more careful. They knew assumptions could damage cases. They needed facts. They needed names. They needed proof. Behind every possible connection was a real person. A real family. A real story. And that responsibility weighed heavily. Because every time investigators reopened an old disappearance, they created hope. And hope could be painful. For families who had waited years, a new investigation meant the possibility of answers. But it also meant reopening wounds they had learned to live with. One mother described the feeling perfectly. You spend years trying to accept that you may never know. Then one phone call brings everything back. That was the reality of cold cases. They never truly disappear. They wait. The suspect remained under scrutiny. His past was being reconstructed. His movements examined. His statements compared against evidence. And every new discovery made the same question louder. How many secrets had followed him through the years? The Texas case had finally been solved. But the deeper investigators looked, the more they realized the road from 1998 might not have ended there. It might have continued. Through other towns. Other highways. Other nights when someone vanished and no one understood why. And now, with the first door opened, investigators stood in front of a hallway filled with unanswered questions. The cold case that had shocked Texas was no longer just one story. It was a warning. Because the truth had waited for years. And now that it had been found, it was demanding to be heard. The truth had finally entered the courtroom. But for the families who had waited decades, the courtroom was not the finish line. It was another battlefield. A place where memories, evidence, and unanswered questions would collide under bright lights while everyone searched for one thing: the complete truth. The Texas 1998 cold case had transformed from a forgotten file into a national story. The arrest had shocked the community. The DNA breakthrough had rewritten everything investigators thought they knew. A case once buried under years of silence was now being examined by everyone. But behind the headlines was a reality most people never saw. The waiting. The uncertainty. The emotional weight carried by those who had spent years wondering if they would ever hear the words they had been desperate to hear. She has been found. She has a name. Someone is responsible. For the victim's family, identification brought both relief and pain. Because knowing the truth does not erase what happened. It only replaces uncertainty with reality. The family finally had answers about where she had been all those years. But they also had to face the most painful answer of all. She had not walked away. She had not started a new life. She had been taken from them. And the person responsible had continued living while they carried the burden of not knowing. Inside the courtroom, prosecutors built their case carefully. They understood the challenge. The crime was old. The memories were old. The physical evidence had survived decades, but time had damaged the details. They could not rely on emotion alone. They needed facts. DNA. The confession. The timeline. The evidence that connected the suspect to the victim. Piece by piece, they reconstructed the story of that night in 1998. A woman who disappeared. A road where no one was supposed to find her. A man who believed distance and time would protect him. But the defense had a strategy. They attacked the gaps. The missing details. The years between the crime and the arrest. They argued that memories changed. That statements made decades later could not be trusted. They questioned the reliability of evidence preserved for so long. They reminded the jury that suspicion was not the same as proof. And legally they were right about one thing. Time creates doubt. That is why cold cases are so difficult. The past does not stay perfectly preserved. People forget. Records disappear. Witnesses move away. But sometimes, time also creates something investigators did not have before. Perspective. A single piece of evidence can mean little in the beginning. Then years later, with new technology and new understanding, it can become the key that unlocks everything. That was what happened with the DNA. In 1998, it was just a sample. A small piece of evidence stored away. A possibility. In the modern era, it became a voice from the past. A message that survived when everything else faded. During the trial, investigators described the moment the DNA match returned. The moment a woman without a name became a person again. The courtroom listened as they explained how the investigation had restarted. How old records were reopened. How forgotten connections were discovered. How the smallest genetic link had led them back to the person sitting only a few feet away. The suspect showed little emotion. That was something many people noticed. Throughout the entire process, he remained controlled. Calm. Almost detached. To some, it looked like confidence. To others, it looked like someone who had spent years practicing the art of hiding. But investigators knew better than to judge a person's guilt by their expression. They focused on evidence. Because evidence was what had survived. During testimony, the most powerful moments did not come from dramatic accusations. They came from simple facts. Dates. Locations. Records. A series of ordinary details that, together, created an impossible picture. The man had been there. The victim had disappeared. His story changed. The evidence did not. One investigator described the case as a puzzle missing its final piece. For years, they had every piece except the one that mattered most. Identity. Now they had it. And once the picture became clear, it could not be unseen. The victim's family spoke publicly for the first time. Their words were not filled with anger alone. They spoke about who she had been before she became a case number. A daughter. A sister. A friend. A person who laughed. A person with dreams. A person whose life had continued in the memories of those who loved her, even while investigators searched through evidence and records trying to understand how it ended. That was something cold cases often reveal. The victim is never the mystery. The victim is always the person. The mystery is how someone could take that life away. As the trial continued, investigators returned again and again to the same question. Why? Why did this happen? Why her? Why that night? Why did someone choose to commit such an act and then continue living as if nothing had happened? Those questions are often the hardest because sometimes there are no satisfying answers. No explanation that can repair the damage. No reason that makes sense. Only the reality of what happened. The jury eventually reached the moment everyone had been waiting for. A decision. A judgment. After decades of uncertainty, after years of investigation, after countless unanswered questions, the case finally reached its final stage. The verdict was delivered. Guilty. The word echoed through the courtroom. For the victim's family, it was not celebration. It was closure mixed with grief. Because justice can punish the person responsible, but it cannot return what was lost. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered. The story that began on a silent Texas road in 1998 had reached its conclusion. But investigators knew something. Cold cases rarely end completely. They leave behind questions. They leave behind lessons. They leave behind reminders of the victims who waited years to be found. The Texas 1998 case became another example of something law enforcement had learned again and again. Time does not always protect criminals. Sometimes time works against them. Every conversation, every record, every piece of evidence, every forgotten detail, it all remains, waiting for the right moment, waiting for someone to look again. The road where she was found eventually became just another road. Cars passed. People traveled. Life continued. But for the families, investigators, and community members who knew the story, that place would always represent something more. A question. A search. A promise that even the oldest mysteries can still be answered. Because the case was never truly forgotten. It was waiting. Waiting for technology. Waiting for determination. Waiting for someone to open the file one more time. And when they finally did, a voice from the past spoke. A cold case became a solved case. A missing woman became a name. And a secret that survived for decades finally came into the light. The suffocating atmosphere inside the concrete interrogation room pressed down with the crushing weight of 28 years of carefully guarded lies, shifting the entire dynamic from a routine procedural inquiry into a relentless psychological reckoning. The harsh, glaring hum of the overhead fluorescent tube felt like a physical heartbeat, throbbing in sync with the rapid, shallow breaths of a man who had spent nearly 3 decades perfecting the performance of an ordinary, law-abiding citizen. Across the cold, scratched metal table, seasoned cold case investigators did not need to raise their voices. The devastating power of unassailable modern forensic science spoke volumes through the silent presentation of evidence laid bare between them. The microscopic genetic profile extracted from the degraded fabric fibers recovered from the trunk of that long-abandoned vehicle left zero room for semantic debate, courtroom maneuvering, or convenient memory lapses. It was an absolute, undeniable match that tied the suspect directly to the final moments of the victim's life back in the blistering summer of 1998. The lead detective, a weather-beaten veteran whose face bore the deep canyon lines of countless battles against the darkest elements of human nature, leaned slowly forward, his eyes locked onto the shivering hands of a man whose facade of absolute control was finally beginning to fracture at the seams. No cinematic table slapping was necessary. The sheer gravity of the trap closing in around him was enough to dismantle every single alibi, fabricated timeline, and protective shield the suspect had meticulously constructed over generations. "The clock has run out," the detective whispered, his voice cutting through the heavy silence like a razor-sharp blade slicing through old paper as he slid the final DNA lab report across the metal surface. "We know you were there that night. We know what you did beneath the sprawling Texas stars. And more importantly, we know that the crushing weight of this secret has been eating you alive from the inside out for almost 30 years. The impact of those exact words acted as a violent catalyst inside the suspect's mind, tearing away the last remaining layers of psychological defense and plunging him headfirst into the terrifying realization that his carefully guarded fortress of impunity had crumbled into dust. His lips twitched uncontrollably, forming silent, stuttering denials that died instantly in a dry, constricted throat completely paralyzed by the suffocating realization of absolute defeat. A violent nervous tick flickered incessantly beneath his left eye, a clear physiological betrayal of a brain waging an unwinnable war between the desperate, primal instinct for self-preservation and the overwhelming, suffocating urge to finally vomit out the truth that had poisoned his existence for decades. Outside the heavily fortified walls of the precinct, the relentless Texas night bore down with a stifling, oppressive humidity, as if the very climate of the region was holding its collective breath, waiting for the dam to burst and unleash the flood of long-delayed justice. Investigative reporters and local news crews, tipped off by an unprecedented surge of sudden police activity within the homicide division, had already begun massing. Behind the perimeter barricades, pointing high-powered camera lenses and directional microphones straight toward the illuminated windows of the second-floor office. They knew instinctively that history was unfolding behind those closed doors, that the ironclad wall of silence shielding a monster for nearly 3 decades was moments away from being completely obliterated by the sheer force of a breaking confession. Inside the room, the suspect closed his eyes tightly, desperately trying to shut out the haunting mental images of that fateful night in 1998 that had tormented his subconscious through thousands of sleepless, sweat-drenched nights. When he finally forced his eyelids open, the cold, arrogant defiance that had defined his personality for years had utterly vanished, replaced entirely by the hollow, vacant stare of a man who fully understood that his time on borrowed freedom had officially expired. His chest heaved erratically, drawing in ragged, shallow gasps of air as if he were suffocating in an open room, expelling decades of accumulated terror, panic, and unrelenting nightmares with every shuddering exhale. I didn't mean for it to go that far. He finally choked out, his voice reduced to a frail, trembling whisper that barely registered on the high-sensitivity recording microphones positioned discreetly across the interrogation table. That simple, fragile admission functioned as the skeleton key that finally unlocked the pitch-black Pandora's box of a secret buried beneath layers of shifting dirt, false alibis, and decades of societal deception. The detectives held their breath, acutely aware that they were capturing a watershed moment in the criminal history of the state, a turning point that would finally offer a measure of long-overdue peace to a family broken by decades of agonizing uncertainty. Without needing further prodding, the man began to unravel the horrific narrative, meticulously recounting the terrifying sequence of events from a summer night in 1998 that law enforcement had spent nearly 30 years trying to piece together through fragmented clues and dead-end theories. He described with chilling clarity how he had crossed paths with the young victim in the quiet, shadowed neighborhood streets, exploiting the naive sense of absolute security that lulled the suburban community into a deep, vulnerable slumber. He spoke of the sheer terror reflected in the victim's eyes, a haunting visual imprint that he confessed had transformed every single night of his life into an inescapable psychological prison far more brutal than any concrete cell he was now destined to inhabit. Every single word uttered by his trembling lips served as a blunt force trauma to the past, stripping away the lingering romanticized mysteries of a cold case to expose the raw, unfiltered depravity of a predatory crime committed in the dead of night. The investigators recorded every syllable with intense, unwavering focus, though the audio devices were already capturing the permanent historical record for prosecutors, judges, and the inevitable trial that would seal the murderer's fate forever. The harrowing confession pressed relentlessly forward into the darkest hours of that 1998 morning, detailing the frantic, clandestine transport of the victim's body to a remote, desolate tract of rural land far beyond the suburban sprawl, a forgotten geographical void where towering brush and rugged terrain promised absolute concealment from the prying eyes of the world. For nearly 3 decades, search parties and specialized canine units had scoured countless square miles of nearby state parks and roadside ditches, completely unaware that the actual resting place lay hidden much deeper within private, forgotten acreage, masked beneath thick layers of limestone, stubborn roots, and unforgiving Texas clay. The confessed killer provided exact, pinpoint geographical coordinates, referencing an idiosyncratic landmark, a lightning-split twin mesquite tree standing like a jagged sentinel amidst an ocean of thorny scrubland that would serve as an infallible map for the forensic recovery teams. The detectives exchanged grim glances, struck simultaneously by a profound sense of professional validation and deep-seated disgust at the clinical, detached manner with which the individual outlined the topography of his crime, as if describing a routine camping trip rather than the clandestine burial of an innocent life snuffed out in its absolute prime. The temperature inside the interrogation room seemed to drop drastically as the narrative reached its most disturbing milestones, laying bare the utterly petty, self-serving catalyst that had sparked an act of unimaginable violence. There were no grand international conspiracies, no complex criminal underworld connections, Only the fragile, toxic rage of a bruised ego meeting a defiant rejection on a warm summer evening, sealing a tragic, irreversible fate for both lives involved. The torrent of words continued to pour forth unhindered, a desperate psychological purge clearing out the toxic rot of a man who had successfully played the role of a normal, respected community member while carrying the rotting corpse of a hidden murder inside his conscience every single day of his adult life. Outside, the pre-dawn darkness of the Texas plains began to stretch and fade into a bruised purple twilight, entirely unaware of the massive media earthquake about to strike the public consciousness the moment the transcripts and audio feeds were officially cleared for public broadcast. Assigned tactical and forensic units inside the precinct instantly began coordinating the clandestine recovery operation, mobilizing specialized archaeological teams and state evidence technicians to secure the designated burial site before the glaring heat of the morning sun could compromise any lingering fragile remains or alter the pristine crime scene environment. This was the definitive beginning of the end for the notorious 1998 cold case, a breathtaking and devastating conclusion proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that no matter how deep a secret is, buried beneath the sands of time, the unyielding persistence of truth and justice will always find a way to tear open the earth and drag it kicking and screaming into the glaring light of day. The exact geographical coordinates wrung from the suspect during his harrowing psychological collapse in the early morning hours served as a grim roadmap toward the most devastating and long-awaited epilogue in modern Texas criminal history. Just as the eastern horizon began to streak with a sickly, bruised purple twilight, a heavily armored convoy of unmarked law enforcement vehicles and specialized forensic recovery units rolled out of the county precinct, abandoning the quiet safety of the town to plunge deep into the unforgiving, sun-baked expanse of the rural backcountry. The atmosphere inside the leading vehicles was thick, suffocating, and charged with an intense, razor-sharp focus. 28 years of accumulated grief, dead-end investigative theories, structural frustration, and a grieving mother's unwavering prayers now hinged entirely on the physical realities waiting to be uncovered beneath the parched brush of the designated site. At the wheel of the lead tactical unit, the veteran lead investigator gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity, continuously running through the suspect's exact directions in his mind, scanning the desolate horizon for the single landmark that would confirm they were heading straight into the heart of darkness. When the convoy finally crunched to a halt along a desolate, unmarked dirt track choked with thick cedar and thorny cactus, the blinding halogen high beams cut a brutal path through the lingering morning mist, illuminating a landscape that looked entirely untouched by time since that tragic summer night in 1998. The tactical agents and evidence technicians stepped out into the biting pre-dawn chill in absolute, reverent silence, their heavy tactical boots crunching rhythmically against the dry, brittle limestone gravel, while specialized transport cases and heavy digging equipment were silently unloaded from the rear compartments. Powerful portable generator-powered floodlights were quickly hoisted into position, flooding the secluded clearing with an aggressive, sterile white glare that instantly banished the natural shadows and transformed a forgotten patch of wilderness into an outdoor forensic laboratory. Every single team member moved with a calculated, robotic precision born of extensive experience and the profound, sobering realization of what, and who, they were searching for in this desolate wasteland. The air carried the ancient, distinct scent of dry earth, decaying mesquite wood, and a heavy, suffocating stillness that seemed to mock the decades of desperate searching that had taken place just miles away from this very spot. Following the precise navigational vectors provided by the confessed killer, a vanguard of seasoned investigators moved in a tight, methodical formation through the tangled brush, sweeping the terrain with advanced, ground-penetrating radar equipment and high-powered searchlights until the beam washed over the defining geographical anomaly, the lightning-split twin mesquite trees standing like a jagged, ominous monolith amid the sea of scrubland. The collective pulse of the entire recovery team spiked instantaneously. The physical reality of the landscape matched the murderer's confession with terrifying, Chilling accuracy, confirming beyond any lingering shred of doubt that they were standing directly above a grave kept hidden by nature and malice for nearly 3 decades. The crime scene commander immediately raised a gloved hand, signaling a halt, and within seconds, yellow crime scene tape was hastily strung between the surrounding branches, sealing off the sacred perimeter with an official boundary of law and accountability. Forensic archaeologists and specialized anthropologists stepped forward with an almost ceremonial reverence, kneeling onto the harsh, alkaline soil with hand trowels, fine bristle brushes, and sifting screens, acutely aware that every single handful of dirt held fragments of a stolen life and the ultimate validation of justice. The painstaking excavation began under a shroud of absolute quiet, save for the rhythmic scraping of metal against packed clay and the low, muffled hum of the generator in the background. The investigators stationed along the perimeter watched with bated breath, their eyes scanning the surrounding thickets, as if expecting the ghosts of the past to materialize from the shadows to bear witness to the unearthing of their dark secret. Hours dissolved into a blur of meticulous, millimeter-by-millimeter manual labor, the team scraping away topsoil, roots, and stubborn caliche layers that had locked the remains in a subterranean vault of absolute silence since 1998. As the sun crested the horizon, casting long, dramatic shadows across the clearing, the sharp edge of a forensic trowel struck something solid beneath the surface, a dull, resonant thud that instantly froze every single pair of hands in the pit. The atmosphere in the clearing grew instantly heavy, dropping in emotional temperature as the realization crashed over them like a tidal wave. All floodlights and specialized lamps were angled downward, converging in a tight, blinding circle of illumination around the subterranean anomaly. With infinite care, the lead anthropologist brushed away the final crust of dry, packed earth, exposing the pale, silent contours of a human form resting in the exact posture in which it had been discarded nearly 28 years prior. The discovery hit the gathered law enforcement officers with the force of a physical blow to the chest, a brutal, undeniable reminder of the absolute fragility of human existence and the grotesque lengths to which a corrupt human mind could go to preserve its own selfish freedom. Working with the delicate touch of surgeons performing open-heart procedures, the forensic specialists began clearing the surrounding sediment, revealing not only skeletal remains that still wore tattered, weather-beaten fragments of clothing instantly recognizable from the original 1998 missing person case files, but also personal effects that had survived the decades underground. Resting right beside the skeletal hand was a small, tarnished silver pendant, a custom-engraved initial necklace that the victim's mother had painstakingly described in every missing person poster distributed across the state 3 decades ago, an unmistakable token of identity that had stubbornly refused to decay alongside mortal flesh. The sight of that heartbreakingly ordinary object sent a palpable wave of profound emotional shock through the hardened tactical team. Several battle-hardened agents turned their heads away for a split second, blinking rapidly against sudden, unbidden tears of raw empathy. There was no longer any room for legal skepticism, forensic debate, or speculative theories. The nightmare that had fractured a Texas family and haunted a suburban community for an entire generation was now laid bare under the blinding glare of scientific truth. While the meticulous process of photographing, cataloging, and recovering the skeletal remains proceeded with rigorous, unbroken chain of custody protocols, the bright light of morning fully illuminated the crime scene, driving away the last remnants of the midnight shadows. Secure radio communications crackled to life, relaying the successful recovery status back to the main homicide division downtown and authorizing the immediate dispatch of the county coroner's transport van to receive the remains for formal autopsy and final DNA confirmation. Back in the town center, the carefully guarded secret of the early morning raid could no longer be contained, as local stringers and regional news producers picked up the frantic police scanner chatter and immediately mobilized satellite broadcast units toward the county courthouse and the precinct headquarters. Within the hour, breaking news banners would violently rupture the morning programming across Texas television networks, flashing urgent, Bold headlines announcing that the infamous 1998 cold case had finally shattered wide open with the physical recovery of the victim's body from a remote rural grave. The wider public, lulled into a complacent routine, was about to wake up to a seismic cultural shock that would prove, once and for all, that time does not heal all wounds, and that the universe possesses an innate, relentless mechanism to drag even the most deeply buried sins out of the dark and into the unforgiving light of absolute justice. The final, blinding light of daybreak over the vast Texas plains brought no gentle awakening, but rather the fierce, uncompromising roar of a legal reckoning that an entire state had demanded since that scorching summer of 1998. Across the region, television screens in every household flickered violently with urgent breaking news banners, cutting through morning routines with bold red lettering that blared the absolute resolution of the mystery and the catastrophic collapse of the wall of silence that had protected a murderer for nearly 3 decades. Outside the historic county courthouse, a sprawling human sea of reporters, photojournalists, satellite truck technicians, and stunned local residents had spontaneously materialized, turning the sun-bleached asphalt into a volatile incubator of electric tension and hushed, rapid-fire murmurs that instantly died down whenever a distant siren wailed across the flat horizon. The expressions etched onto the faces of the gathered crowd mirrored a chilling cocktail of profound relief, lingering disbelief, and visceral shock, the terrifying realization that the monster had lived among them in plain sight, buying groceries at the local market, chatting amiably over white picket fences, and walking the same quiet suburban streets without a single drop of suspicion, sent a collective shiver deep down the spine of every person present. Inside the heavily secured limestone halls of the courthouse, the atmosphere was thick with a glacial, ceremonial solemnity, broken only by the rhythmic, high-pitched clacking of court stenographers' keyboards and the heavy, determined footfalls of district prosecutors conducting their final cross-references of the ironclad, multi-volume case file. The thick cardboard dossier, which for 28 agonizing years had gathered thick layers of yellowed dust inside the back shelves of the cold case unit, was now bursting at the seams with undisputed, mathematically absolute proof. State-of-the-art autosomal DNA profiles, audio-recorded confessions, verified topographical coordinates, and the physical skeletal remains of a young life violently stolen. The formal arraignment of the confessed killer was slated for the mid-morning docket, marking the historic, irreversible dawn of a judicial process designed to slam shut the rusted gates of a nightmare that had haunted a generation of Texans. When the heavy, brass-trimmed oak doors of the main courtroom finally swung inward, an absolute vacuum of sound swallowed the entire chamber, an acoustic stillness so profound that the collective breathing of hundreds of spectators seemed to pause in unison. Media cameras mounted on high-tech tripods and accredited press photographers recorded the precise, agonizing second when the accused murderer was led through the side entrance, firmly secured in heavy steel handcuffs by 2 stone-faced department bailiffs whose grips left zero possibility of escape or hesitation. Gone was the carefully manicured facade of the respected community pillar, the calm, unshakable demeanor of an ordinary citizen who had played his role to absolute perfection for nearly 3 decades. His shoulders were visibly rounded. His skin had taken on a sickly, gray pallor born of acute sleep deprivation and crushing psychological claustrophobia, and his eyes remained stubbornly locked onto the worn linoleum floor as if desperately hoping the earth would open up and swallow him whole. Seated rigidly in the very front row of the public gallery, enveloped in a heavy, uncompromising black morning coat that she had worn as a permanent psychological armor since the summer of 1998, was the victim's mother, flanked by victim advocacy lawyers and anchored by the invisible, powerful solidarity of an entire community standing shoulder to shoulder behind her grief. Her facial features were carved like a monument of pure human endurance and unyielding maternal fortitude, a countenance where decades of bitter, unceasing tears had finally crystallized into a quiet, terrifying resolve, belonging to a woman who had walked through the deepest circles of personal hell and had lived to witness the long-overdue arrival of absolute accountability. As the presiding judge strode into the chamber with measured, deliberate steps and issued the traditional, resounding command for the gallery to be seated, the collective shifting of polished wooden benches echoed like distant thunder through the high-ceilinged room, marking the official inception of a landmark legal proceeding that would be permanently etched into the annals of American criminal jurisprudence. The formal reading of the multi-count criminal indictment by the senior prosecutor sliced through the heavy air with razor-sharp precision, meticulously detailing the gravity of the charges, premeditated first-degree murder, kidnapping, and the unlawful desecration and concealment of human remains over a span of 28 years. Each syllable of the reading functioned as a sledgehammer pounding against the already shattered fragments of the murderer's decades-long deception, fully exposing the raw, pathetic cowardice of his actions and the incomprehensible magnitude of the emotional devastation inflicted upon a family denied closure for nearly half a lifetime. When the judge formally looked down from the elevated mahogany bench and directly asked the defendant how he wished to plead to the devastating litany of charges, the man slowly forced his chin upward, his lips quivering uncontrollably against a suffocating throat constriction as he uttered the words that permanently extinguished his remaining legal breathing room. "Guilty, Your Honor. I am entirely guilty." The confession, delivered in a fragile, broken baritone that barely carried across the quiet courtroom, triggered an audible, collective gasp from the gallery, a sharp exhalation of air that swept through the rows like a sudden, freezing gust of wind across the open plains. The prosecuting attorneys exchanged swift, triumphant glances, acutely aware that this explicit, unforced admission of guilt completely short-circuited any potential maneuvering by defense counsel, instantly sealing a lifetime sentence of hard time behind the impenetrable concrete walls of a maximum security state penitentiary with zero possibility of parole. Yet, far beyond the sterile mechanics of statutory sentencing and the rigid protocols of criminal procedure, the true, vibrating core of the day belonged to the symbolic closure of a wound that had festered in the collective conscience of Texas for nearly 3 decades. Outside the courthouse gates, national news networks had already cut into live afternoon broadcasts, beaming high-definition footage of the prison transport van inching its way through the furious, banner-waving crowd of citizens who screamed demands for permanent justice while holding aloft framed photographs of the young victims smiling brightly in 1998. Interviews captured outside local diners and suburban front porches showed neighbors staring blankly into camera lenses, voicing the same hollow, terror-filled refrain over and over again. How could anyone sit next to a killer at local Little League games, wave hello across manicured lawns, and share decades of mundane community life without ever sensing the bottomless abyss of darkness living right next door? The grim answer hung suspended in the hot Texas air, an uncomfortable reminder that the most dangerous predators do not always lurk in midnight alleys or desolate wilderness tracks, but frequently were the safest, most comfortable disguises of everyday normalcy, hiding their crimes behind the mundane banality of a quiet, respectable existence. As the heavily guarded convoy carrying the confessed murderer accelerated down the interstate toward the state penitentiary, swallowed whole by the blinding glare of the afternoon sun, the cyclical nightmare of the 1998 cold case officially crossed its final finish line, leaving behind an indelible blueprint of resilience for law enforcement agencies across the globe. In a quiet, shaded corner of the local community cemetery, a newly excavated plot awaited the impending arrival of the recovered forensic remains, designated to receive a dignified, permanent burial beside the resting places of family members who had spent their final earthly breaths praying for this exact moment of divine and human reckoning. Though the official police case file would forever be stamped with the bold, closed seal of an archived investigation, the haunting narrative of the missing girl and the agonizing journey toward her discovery would continue to echo through generations as an immortal testament to the unyielding power of truth, proving for all time that no matter how deep an evil is buried beneath the sands of deception, the relentless persistence of justice will always tear open the earth and drag it out into the unforgiving light.